The desert wind carried dust and secrets across the New Mexico territory that summer of 1878, and Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of everything she'd ever known, watching smoke rise from the canyon below. Her wedding dress, carefully packed in her trunk just 3 days ago in Boston, seemed like a relic from another lifetime now. The stagecoach that was supposed to carry her to Fort Sumner lay overturned half a mile back, its wheels still spinning lazily in the afternoon heat, and somewhere in the rocks behind her, men were dying. She pressed herself against the boulder, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might give away her position. The Apache warriors had come like shadows, materializing from the landscape itself, and the cavalry escort her father had paid for had scattered like tumbleweeds. Captain Morrison, who'd promised her safe passage, was face down in the sand with an arrow through his spine. The other soldiers had run or fallen, and Sarah had done the only thing that made sense in that moment of pure terror. She'd run toward the canyon instead of away from it, deeper into Apache country, because sometimes survival means choosing the devil you don't know over the one that's already killing you. The sound of footsteps on stone made her breath catch. Not the heavy boots of cavalry or the desperate scramble of fleeing men, but something quieter, more deliberate. She closed her eyes and thought of James, her intended, waiting at the fort with his neat uniform and careful plans for their life together. A good man, her father had said. A safe choice. James had written her letters full of descriptions of the territory, the climate, the opportunities for an ambitious officer. He'd never once written about love, but Sarah had convinced herself that was fine. That love was something that grew over time like plants in well-tended soil. You can come out now. The voice was low, barely above a whisper, spoken in English with only the faintest trace of accent. The fighting is over. Sarah opened her eyes and found herself looking at a man who seemed carved from the same red rock as the canyon walls. He stood perhaps 10 feet away, watching her with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite amusement. He wore traditional Apache clothing, his long black hair held back with a red cloth, and carried himself with the kind of authority that made Sarah understand immediately that this was no ordinary warrior. This was a leader, someone the others followed. "Are you going to kill me?" The words came out steadier than she'd expected. He tilted his head slightly, considering the question as if it genuinely required thought. "That depends on whether you give me a reason to. The soldiers are dead or gone. You're alone in my country, far from your people. Tell me why I should let you walk away." Sarah pushed herself away from the boulder, forcing herself to stand straight despite the trembling in her legs. If she was going to die, she'd do it on her feet. "Because killing me would be easy," she said. "And I suspect you're a man who prefers interesting choices over easy ones." For a moment, his expression didn't change, and Sarah wondered if she'd miscalculated badly. Then something shifted in his eyes, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of something seen and recognized. "What's your name?" "Sarah Mitchell. I was traveling to Fort Sumner to be married." "Was?" The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Sarah hadn't fully considered until that moment. Was she still traveling to the fort? Was she still planning to marry James? The stagecoach was destroyed, the escort dead, and she stood in the presence of an Apache war leader who held her life in his hands like a bird that might be released or crushed on a whim. "What's your name?" she asked instead of answering. "My people call me Nate. The Mexicans call me Trouble. The Americans call me worse things." He gestured toward the canyon rim. "Come, standing here makes you visible to anyone with a rifle and bad intentions. There's a camp below where you'll be safe while we decide what to do with you." "Safe?" "I'm your prisoner." "You're alive," Nate corrected. "Let's not complicate it beyond that just yet." He turned and began walking along the canyon edge, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every stone and shadow. Sarah hesitated for perhaps 3 seconds before following. What choice did she have? Return to the overturned stagecoach and wait for rescue that might never come? Wander into the desert and die of thirst? At least with Nate, she had a chance at survival. Even if that survival came with conditions she couldn't yet imagine, the path down into the canyon was narrow and treacherous, barely wide enough for one person. and Sarah found herself concentrating so hard on not falling that she almost forgot to be afraid. Almost. Nate moved ahead of her, with the ease of long practice, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still following. And Sarah noticed things about him despite her fear, the way he moved like water flowing downhill, the careful attention he paid to the landscape, the fact that he'd sheathed his weapons as if she posed no threat worth worrying about. That last observation stung more than it should have. She'd always thought of herself as capable, strong-minded, the kind of woman who could adapt to frontier life. But standing next to this man who belonged to the desert the way rocks belong to mountains, she felt soft and unprepared. Like a book-learned scholar trying to explain farming to someone who'd worked the soil their whole life. The canyon opened up below them, revealing a hidden valley where smoke rose from cooking fires and children played in the dust. Apache wiki-ups dotted the landscape, and Sarah could see women working, men repairing weapons, the whole machinery of a living community. They'd hidden themselves so perfectly that no one passing above would ever suspect they were there. Nate stopped at the base of the path and turned to face her. The people here have lost family to American soldiers. They have reasons to hate you. I'm going to ask you to trust me, which I know is asking a lot from someone who was running from my warriors an hour ago. But if you do exactly as I say, I can keep you alive. Sarah looked past them at the camp, at the faces turning toward them with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. She thought of James waiting at the fort, of her father back in Boston, of the life she'd planned that seemed to be dissolving like morning mist. Then she looked back at Nate and saw something in his eyes that she couldn't quite name, a challenge, perhaps, or a question. "All right," she said. "I'll trust you." For now, his lips quirked in what might have been approval. For now is all any of us have come. And Sarah Mitchell, who'd left Boston 3 weeks ago to marry a man she barely knew, followed an Apache war leader into a camp full of people who had every reason to want her dead, and discovered that fear and excitement could feel remarkably similar when your whole world was changing with every step. The woman who stepped forward from the crowd had eyes like flint, and a scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a pale line against copper skin that spoke of survival and suffering. She addressed Nate in rapid Apache, her voice sharp with accusation. And though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear enough. What is this white woman doing here? And why is she still breathing? Nate responded calmly, his tone respectful but firm, and Sarah watched the dynamics play out between them with the fascination of someone trying to learn a new language through context alone. Other people gathered around now, forming a loose circle that felt less like curiosity and more like a jury deliberating. An older man with gray streaking his hair stepped forward, speaking more quietly than the woman, but with an authority that made even Nate listen carefully. "They want to know who you are and why you're here," Nate said finally, turning to Sarah. "More specifically, they want to know if killing you will bring soldiers down on this camp." Sarah swallowed hard. "Will it?" "Probably, eventually. The soldiers don't need much excuse." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me about the man you were going to marry." The question caught her off guard. "James, Captain James Thornton. He's stationed at Fort Sumner. We've been engaged for 6 months, though we've only met twice. Do you love him?" The bluntness of the question, asked in front of a dozen Apache warriors and their families, made Sarah's cheeks burn. "That's hardly your concern." "It's very much my concern if he's the kind of man who'll burn half the territory looking for you. A man in love does stupid, violent things. A man who's lost property files a report and moves on with his life." The casual cruelty of the observation hit Sarah like cold water. "I'm not property. I know that." "Does Captain Thornton?" Nate's voice was low, almost gentle. "Tell me when to stop." Sarah looked around at the faces watching her, at the woman with the scar and the gray-haired elder and the children peeking out from behind their mother's skirts. These were people who'd lost land, family, freedom, lost everything to the relentless westward push of American expansion. They had every reason to hate her, to see her as a symbol of everything that had been taken from them. And yet here she stood, alive, being asked questions instead of simply being killed. "I won't," she said softly, meeting Nature's eyes. "I won't tell you to stop asking hard questions, because I think I need to hear them." Something shifted in the group then, a subtle change in the atmosphere that Sarah felt rather than saw. The woman with the scar spoke again, this time in English, heavily accented but clear. "My name is Desba. I lost my husband to American soldiers 3 years ago. They shot him in the back while he was gathering wood for our fire. He was not a warrior. He was a father." She paused, and Sarah could see the weight of that loss in every line of her face. "You are not the ones who killed him, but you wear their faces, speak their language, come into our land like you own the wind itself?" "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. "I can't change what's been done. I can't bring your husband back. But I'm not here by choice, and I'm not your enemy." "Then what are you?" Desba asked. "Lost sheep? Foolish child playing at frontier life?" Sarah felt anger spark in her chest, hot and sudden. "I'm a woman trying to survive, same as you. I didn't ask for that stagecoach to be attacked. I didn't ask to watch men die. I didn't ask to stand here defending my right to exist to people who've already decided what I am based on the color of my skin." The silence that followed her outburst was profound. Then, unexpectedly, Desba laughed, a short, harsh sound that held no humor but perhaps a trace of respect. "At least you have a spine. That's something." She turned to Nate and spoke in Apache again, a long string of words that seemed to be part argument and part agreement. Nate nodded slowly. "Desba says you can stay in her wickiup tonight. Tomorrow we'll decide what happens next. But there are rules. You don't wander away from the camp. You don't try to signal any soldiers who might pass nearby. You work like everyone else works. We don't keep useless mouths fed here. And you learn our ways, our language, because if you're going to be among us, you're going to understand us." "Agreed?" Sarah looked at Desba, at the challenge in the other woman's eyes, and understood that this was a test. Not of strength or courage necessarily, but of something else, willingness, perhaps, or flexibility. The ability to let go of assumptions and see the world through different eyes. "Agreed," she said. The days that followed taught Sarah more about herself than all her years in Boston had managed. Desba worked her hard, teaching her how to gather wood properly, how to prepare food from plants Sarah had never known were edible, how to repair clothing with bone needles and sinew thread. The work was exhausting, humbling, and oddly satisfying in a way that her previous life, full of social calls and embroidery and carefully constructed conversations, had never been. She learned Apache words slowly, haltingly, and found that language shaped thought in unexpected ways. There was no word for ownership in the way English used it. No way to say, "this land is mine," that didn't sound absurd when translated. The Apache saw themselves as part of the land, not masters of it. And that difference in perspective explained so much about the conflict that had brought Sarah to this canyon in the first place. Nate came by the wickiup each evening to check on her, and their conversations became the highlight of Sarah's days. He asked about Boston, about her life there, about the books she'd read and the ideas that had shaped her. In return, he told her stories of the Apache people, of the time before the Americans came, of the slow erosion of a way of life that had sustained his people for generations. "You're not what I expected," Sarah admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "Watching sparks rise toward the stars, what did you expect? Savage warrior with bloodlust and no ability to reason?" His tone was light, but Sarah heard the edge beneath it. "I don't know what I expected. The stories I heard in Boston painted all Apache as violent and cruel. But the stories I've heard here paint all Americans the same way. I'm starting to think stories are dangerous things when they're all you have. Stories are how we make sense of the world. The problem is when we mistake our stories for the whole truth." Nate poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a fresh spray of sparks. "Your Captain Thornton, has he sent search parties yet?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing. 2 weeks had passed since the stagecoach attack, and surely someone had noticed by now that she hadn't arrived at the fort. "Probably. James is nothing if not thorough, but not passionate?" Why do you care? Because I'm trying to understand you, Sarah Mitchell. You're educated, sharp-minded, braver than you think you are, and you were willing to cross a continent to marry a man you don't love for reasons I can't quite figure out. Sarah stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and shift. My father lost everything in the financial panic 3 years ago. Everything except his reputation, which he used to arrange my engagement to an ambitious officer from a good family. James gets a well-bred wife who can navigate society. I get security. My father gets to save face and rebuild his finances through family connections. Everyone benefits, except you. I benefit too, Sarah said, but the words felt hollow. I get a home, a position, a future. That's more than a lot of women have. You get a cage, Nate said quietly. A comfortable one, maybe, but still a cage. Tell me when to stop. Sarah looked at him sharply. Why do you keep saying that? Because I want to know where your boundaries are. How far you'll let yourself be pushed before you push back. How much truth you can handle before you retreat into comfortable lies. He met her eyes across the fire. You're different here than you were when you arrived. More yourself, maybe. I wonder if you've noticed. She had noticed. That was the terrifying part. In Boston, Sarah had been careful, measured, always aware of how she was perceived. Here, covered in dust and learning to start fires with flint, speaking broken Apache and working until her hands blistered, she felt more genuine than she had in years. It was as if some tight band around her chest had loosened, letting her breathe fully for the first time. I've noticed, she admitted. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything yet. Just notice. That's enough for now. But it wasn't enough, not really, because with each passing day, Sarah felt the pull of two worlds tearing her in different directions. There was the life she'd left behind Boston, James, duty, expectations, safety. And there was this strange, liminal space in the canyon where she was neither prisoner nor guest, neither Apache nor quite American anymore. Just Sarah, trying to figure out who she might be if she could choose for herself. Desba found her alone one afternoon, grinding corn in the traditional way, and sat down beside her without speaking for a long while. Finally, the Apache woman said, "You know he watches you." Sarah's hand stilled. "Nate?" "He tries to hide it, but I see." "Everyone sees." Desba took over the grinding, her movements practiced and efficient. "He's a good man, a strong leader, but his heart is too open sometimes. It makes him vulnerable. I don't want to cause problems. Problems are already here. You're a white woman in an Apache camp? Nate is a war leader who should be thinking about strategy and survival, not teaching English words and sitting by fires talking about books." Desba's hands never stopped moving as she spoke. "I tell you this not to scold, but to warn. Whatever is growing between you two, it cannot grow much further without consequences. For both of you." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She'd been trying not to think about the way her heart sped up when Nate approached. The way his smile made something warm bloom in her chest. The way their conversations felt more intimate than anything she'd shared with James, despite months of engagement. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying be careful. Be honest. With him, with yourself, with what you want from this life." Desba set down the grinding stone and looked at Sarah directly. "And understand that choices made in canyons and around campfires feel different than choices made in the full light of day, with soldiers and settlements nearby. Don't promise anything you can't deliver when the real world comes knocking." The real world came knocking 3 days later in the form of dust on the horizon and the glint of cavalry sabers in the afternoon sun. The scout came running into camp just after dawn, his horse lathered with sweat and his face tight with urgency. Sarah was helping Desba prepare breakfast when the alarm went through the camp, a ripple of tension that made everyone stop what they were doing and look toward Nature's wickiup. Within minutes, the war leader emerged, and Sarah watched him transform from the thoughtful man she'd been talking with the night before into something harder, More focused, a leader preparing his people for danger, he spoke rapidly in Apache. And Sarah caught enough words now to understand the basics. Soldiers coming from the east. Maybe 24? Less than a day's ride away, the camp exploded into controlled chaos. Women began breaking down wickiups that could be moved quickly, packing essential supplies, preparing for potential flight. Warriors checked weapons and gathered in small groups, discussing strategy. Children were collected and kept close to their mothers. It was a dance everyone knew the steps to, performed too many times before. Nate found Sarah standing uncertainly near Desba's wickiup, watching the preparations with growing dread. "You need to decide," he said without preamble. "Now, before the soldiers get here. Decide what? Whether you're going back to them or staying with us?" His face was unreadable, but Sarah could hear the tension in his voice. "If you go back, it needs to be before they reach the camp. We can take you to a spot where they'll find you easily, make it look like you escaped on your own. You tell them you ran during the attack, got lost, survived on your own. They'll take you to the fort, to your Captain Thornton, and you can continue with the life you had planned. And if I stay?" Nature's jaw tightened. "Then you stay through whatever comes next, which might be fighting, might be running, might be worse. The soldiers won't negotiate if they know we have a white woman here. They'll come in hard and people will die. Your people, my people, it won't matter much to the dead which side they were on." Sarah felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her like a physical thing. Everything in her upbringing told her to go back, to return to civilization and safety and the world she understood. But something else, something newer and more insistent, whispered that she'd been more alive in these 3 weeks in the canyon than in all her 23 years before. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "That's not my choice to make, Sarah. I can tell you what would be easier for my people having. You gone before the soldiers arrive would simplify things considerably. But I can't tell you what's right for you." "Only you know that? I don't know anything anymore." Sarah's voice broke slightly. 3 weeks ago, I knew exactly who I was and what my life would be. Now I don't even recognize myself in the reflection water. Desba appeared at Sarah's elbow, having clearly been listening. "This is not a choice about a man," she said firmly. "Don't make it about whether you love Nate or Captain Thornton or anyone else. Make it about which version of yourself you want to be. The woman who goes back to Fort Sumner will live one kind of life. The woman who stays here will live another. Both have costs. Both have gifts. But you cannot walk both paths." Sarah looked between them, Desba with her scarred face and hard-won wisdom, Nate with his carefully controlled expression that didn't quite hide the hope in his eyes. Behind them, the camp continued its urgent preparations. People who had learned to carry their lives on their backs, ready to move at a moment's notice because staying in one place too long meant death. "If I go back," Sarah said slowly, working through it out loud, "I marry James. I live at the fort. I host dinners and attend social functions and raise children to be good American citizens. I'm safe, comfortable, respectable." "Yes," Nate confirmed. "And I spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose differently." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm staying." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then Nate nodded once, sharply. "Then we need to move you somewhere safe before the soldiers arrive. There's a cave system about 2 miles north where we hide supplies and wounded warriors. You'll go there with the children and some of the women while the rest of us deal with the soldiers. I can help. You can help by staying alive and not giving them an excuse to attack." Nate cut her off. "This isn't your fight, Sarah. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But if you stay, you need to understand that my first responsibility is to my people, not to you. I can't protect you and lead them at the same time." The truth of that hit Sarah hard. She'd been thinking about her own choice, her own future, but she hadn't fully considered what her presence meant for everyone else. "Maybe I should go back," she said. "If it would keep people safe." "Too late now," Desba said pragmatically. "Soldiers are close. Moving you to meet them would take time we don't have, and it would show them paths to our camp they might not find on their own. You made your choice. Now we all live with it. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah found herself herded into the caves with a dozen children, 4 elderly people, and 3 women in various stages of pregnancy. It was dark and close and smelled of damp stone and old smoke, but it was hidden well enough that even someone looking directly at the entrance might miss it unless they knew it was there. They sat in the darkness and waited. And Sarah held the hand of a little girl named Dahana, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The child leaned against her side, and Sarah found herself humming softly, an old lullaby her own mother had sung to her lifetimes ago in Boston. Dahana didn't understand the words, but music translated better than language, and gradually the small body relaxed into sleep. The sounds of shouting filtered through the stone, followed by gunshots. Sarah's whole body went rigid. More shots. Men's voices raised in anger or pain, impossible to tell which from this distance. Then silence, horrible and complete, that stretched out until Sarah thought she might scream just to fill it. One of the women placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, holding her in place, reminding her without words that staying still and quiet was the only thing she could do to help now. So Sarah stayed still and quiet, and held the sleeping child and listened to her own heartbeat counting out the seconds, when Nate finally appeared at the cave entrance hours later. Sarah nearly sobbed with relief. He was covered in dust and had a shallow cut across his forearm, but he was alive and walking and looking at her with an expression that made her heart twist. "The soldiers?" she asked. "Gone. We convinced them we were just a small hunting party passing through. They weren't the main search force, just a patrol that got curious about smoke. The real danger is still coming, probably within a few days. They'll be looking specifically for you now." Sarah processed this as she gently extracted herself from Dahana's grip and followed Nate out of the cave. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold, and Sarah realized she'd been in the darkness for most of the day. "What do we do?" "We move camp tonight. There's another place, deeper in the mountains, where we'll be harder to find. It's going to be difficult travel, especially in the dark, but staying here is no longer an option." Nate paused, then added quietly, "You could still change your mind. We could take you to the patrol's trail, make it look like you escaped during the confusion. No one would blame you, would you?" "Blame me, I mean." "No, I'd understand. Self-preservation is nothing to be ashamed of." Sarah looked at the camp being dismantled around her, at the families packing up their lives for the 100th or 1,000th time. Always moving, always hiding, always one step ahead of destruction. She thought about James waiting at Fort Sumner, probably organizing search parties and planning what he'd say when she was found. She thought about her father in Boston, assuming his investment in her marriage had simply been lost to frontier violence. She thought about all the versions of herself she might have been. And then she thought about the woman who'd ground corn with Desba and learned Apache words and held a sleeping child in a dark cave. "I'm not going back," she said firmly. "Whatever happens next, I'm staying." Nate studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah had the sense that he was looking for something, testing her resolve or trying to see into her heart. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "Then you need to know something. The place we're going is where my people have lived in secret for 2 generations. It's sacred ground, hidden ground. By taking you there, I'm trusting you with something that could destroy us all if it fell into the wrong hands. Do you understand what I'm asking? You're asking if I can keep a secret worth dying for. Worth other people dying for. That's a different thing entirely." Sarah took a breath and met his eyes. "I understand. And I won't betray that trust? On whatever honor I have left, I swear it." They moved through the night like ghosts, following paths Sarah couldn't see and probably wouldn't remember even if she tried. Children were carried or walked in careful silence. Horses and supplies moved with practiced quiet. And Sarah walked beside Desba, learning the rhythm of survival, understanding in her bones that the life she'd chosen was nothing like the one she'd left behind. When dawn finally came, they were in a valley so remote and so perfectly hidden that Sarah understood why Nate had hesitated to bring her here. This wasn't just a temporary camp. This was a sanctuary, a piece of the world the Apache had managed to keep for themselves, despite everything. "Welcome to the place between worlds," Nate said softly, standing beside her as the morning light revealed the valley. "Once you step into it, there's no going back to who you were before. Tell me when to stop." Sarah didn't hesitate this time. "I won't." The valley changed Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. In the canyon camp, she'd been a visitor, a temporary presence that everyone knew would eventually leave one way or another. Here, in this hidden sanctuary, she became something else, not quite Apache, not quite American, but a third thing that existed in the spaces between those identities. The people here had been isolated long enough that they treated her arrival as a curiosity rather than a threat, and Sarah found herself slowly being woven into the fabric of daily life. Desba became not just a teacher but a friend, sharing stories of her childhood and the husband she'd lost, teaching Sarah not just practical skills but the philosophy behind them. Why Apache women made decisions about camp movements, how leadership worked in a society that valued consensus over command, the complicated relationship between men and women that was nothing like the rigid hierarchies Sarah had known in Boston. "We are not property," Desba explained one afternoon as they worked together preparing hides. "We choose our husbands, and we can leave them if they prove unworthy. We own our homes, our children belong to our clan lines, and no man can tell us what to do with our bodies or our lives. This is why American women confuse me so much. You have all the power in the world, you create life, you manage homes. You teach children, but you give all that power away to men who couldn't survive a week without you." Sarah laughed despite herself. "When you put it that way, it does sound absurd. Because it is absurd. Your people have made a terrible trade, giving up freedom for the illusion of protection. And now you wonder why you feel like birds in cages." Desba's hands worked the hide with practiced efficiency. "Nate watches you and sees someone trying to escape her cage. That's why he keeps pushing you, asking how far you'll go. He wants to know if you're serious about freedom or just playing at it." "I'm serious," Sarah said quietly. "I think I'm more serious about this than I've ever been about anything in my life." "Good, because what's coming will test that. The soldiers won't stop looking. Your Captain Thornton won't simply accept that you're gone. And Nate's falling in love with you, if he hasn't already fallen completely. That love will make him do foolish things, take risks he shouldn't take. You need to be strong enough to stop him when necessary." Sarah's hands stilled. She'd been trying not to think about what was growing between her and Nate. The way their conversation stretched late into the night. The way his smile made her feel warm all through. The way her heart ached when he was gone for more than a few hours. "I don't know if I can stop him from anything. He's a war leader. I'm just a woman who walked away from everything she knew to live among strangers in a hidden valley. Just a woman who learned Apache in 3 weeks and earned my grudging respect in less. Don't diminish yourself, Sarah Mitchell. You're stronger than you think, which means you're dangerous, to yourself, to him, to all of us if you're not careful." The warning proved prophetic sooner than Sarah expected. A week after they'd arrived in the valley, scouts brought word that a large military force had been seen moving through the territory, asking questions in every settlement, showing a photograph of Sarah that James must have provided. They were systematic, thorough, and getting closer to the hidden valley with every passing day. Nate called a council meeting, and for the first time, Sarah was invited to attend. She sat at the edge of the circle, aware that her presence was being debated, even though no one addressed her directly. The conversation flowed in Apache, too rapid and complex for Sarah to follow completely, but she caught the gist. Some argued that she should be turned over to the soldiers to protect the valley. Others insisted that doing so would only confirm the valley's location and bring more soldiers down on them. A few suggested moving her somewhere else, letting her go, or even though the speaker said it, reluctantly eliminating the problem permanently. Nate listened to all of it, without interrupting, his face expressionless, and Sarah felt a cold knot of fear forming in her stomach. She'd trusted these people with her life, but trust went only so far when survival was at stake. She was one person. The valley held over 60 people, including children. The mathematics of sacrifice were brutally simple. Finally, the gray-haired elder, a man named Goithley, turned to Sarah and spoke in careful English. You have learned some of our ways. You work hard, respect our customs, treat our people with dignity. These things matter. But they do not change the fact that your presence puts everyone here in danger. What would you have us do? Sarah took a breath, aware that everyone was watching her, waiting to see how she'd respond. I won't ask you to risk your lives for me. If the only way to keep this place safe is to send me away, then that's what we should do. But I won't go back to the soldiers. I won't marry Captain Thornton. I won't return to a life that felt like slow suffocation. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. If you send me away, send me north or west, somewhere I can disappear and start over. Let me take the danger with me. Alone? Goyafle's eyebrows rose. You would die within a week. Maybe I'd survive. I've learned a few things. Sarah managed a small smile. Either way, it would be my choice. That matters to me. Nate finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. There's another option. We make it clear that Sarah Mitchell died in the stagecoach attack. We provide evidence enough to convince the soldiers that continued searching is pointless. Then Sarah stops being Sarah Mitchell and becomes someone else. Someone who belongs here. And what evidence would convince them? Another warrior asked skeptically. The soldiers aren't fools. No, but they're practical. If they find a grave with the right item, Sarah's trunk from the stagecoach, some personal effects, enough to identify her, they'll stop searching. Dead women don't require rescue missions. Nate looked at Sarah. We took your trunk from the overturned stagecoach. It's been sitting in storage, waiting for a decision about what to do with it. We use it now? Sarah felt something twist in her chest at the thought of burying that trunk, of literally putting her old life in the ground. The wedding dress her mother had helped her choose, the book she'd brought from Boston, the small portrait of her father, all the physical evidence of Sarah Mitchell, daughter and bride-to-be, consigned to the earth like a corpse. It would work, Desba said thoughtfully, if done carefully. A grave in the right place, discovered by the right patrol. They'd investigate, confirm the identity, report back. The search would end, and I'd be dead. Sarah's voice came out smaller than she'd intend. To everyone I've ever known, I'd just be dead. Nate leaned forward, his eyes intense. You'd be free. Completely, totally free to become whoever you want to be. No past chasing you, no expectations binding you, no cage at all. But it's a permanent choice, Sarah. Once we do this, there's no going back. You'd have to let go of everything, your father, your friends, your old name, your old self. Could you do that? The question hung in the air, and Sarah realized this was what Nate had been asking all along with his repeated tell me when to stop. How far would she go? How much would she sacrifice? How deeply did she mean it when she said she wanted freedom? She thought about her father, who'd see her as a business loss and probably remarry within a year for a financial advantage. She thought about James, who'd mourned the inconvenience more than the woman. She thought about Boston, where she'd spent 23 years being what everyone else needed her to be, and never once asking what she needed for herself. Then she thought about the valley, about Desba's friendship and Dahana's small hand in hers, and the way Nate looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, not just someone worth having. She thought about conversations that lasted, hours and work that tired her body but satisfied something in her soul, and the feeling of belonging to a community that valued her contributions. I could do that, she said finally. I could let her die, let Sarah Mitchell die so someone new could live. Who would you become? Goyafle asked, and Sarah understood that this was the real test. Not whether she'd give up her past, but whether she had the courage to claim a future. She looked at Nate. What's the Apache word for bridge? He tilted his head, considering. We don't have one word exactly, but there's a phrase, which means someone who walks between. It's used for people who move between different groups. who understand multiple ways of being. Then that's who I'll be. Inaida. Someone who walks between. Someone who understands both worlds but belongs completely to neither and therefore is free to choose her own path. Sarah felt something settle in her chest as she said it. A sense of rightness she'd been searching for without knowing it. Kill Sarah Mitchell. Let her rest. I'll be someone new. The council conferred in rapid Apache, and Sarah waited, her heart pounding. Finally, Goethe nodded. We agree. But understand this: if you do this thing, you become one of us in truth. Not a guest, not a curiosity, but family. With all the responsibilities and protections that implies. You would take an Apache name, learn our ways completely, and commit yourself to this people. Can you do that? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. Even knowing it might mean fighting against your own people someday? Even knowing the soldiers won't see you as Apache but as a traitor? The elder's eyes were sharp. Missing nothing. Sarah thought about the word traitor and realized it didn't frighten her the way it should have. My people sold me to a man I didn't love to pay off debts I didn't create. My people built an entire society on cages and called it civilization. If choosing freedom over bondage makes me a traitor, then I'll wear that title proudly. Something that might have been approval flickered across Goyathley's weathered face. Very well. We'll prepare the grave and plant the evidence. Nate, you'll oversee the details. Make sure it's convincing. If the soldiers doubt it, even for a moment, all of this will be for nothing. The council dispersed, and Sarah found herself alone with Nate as the sun set over the valley. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood beside her watching the light change, and Sarah was grateful for the silence. Her whole body felt like it was vibrating with the enormity of what she'd just committed to. You didn't have to choose this, Nate said finally. We could have found another way. What other way? Living in constant hiding, putting everyone at risk? Leaving to die alone in the desert? Going back to a man who saw me as a duty? Sarah shook her head. This is the only way that makes sense. The only way that lets me actually live instead of just surviving. It won't be easy. Being between worlds means never quite belonging to either. People will question you, test you, doubt you. Both sides will see you as the enemy sometimes. I know. Sarah turned to look at him. But I'd rather be questioned and tested and doubted while being true to myself than be accepted while pretending to be someone I'm not. Nature's expression softened. You're braver than you know? I'm terrified, Sarah admitted. But I'm also more certain than I've ever been. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Sarah Mitchell is going to die tomorrow. I'm sorry for that. She seemed like she might have been an interesting person. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but also a smile tugging at her lips. She was okay. A little too careful, too concerned with propriety, too afraid to disappoint people. But she had potential. Maybe whoever comes next will do better. Maybe she will, Nate agreed softly. Tell me when to stop. And for the first time, Sarah understood that he wasn't asking about boundaries or limits. He was asking if she'd changed her mind, if she wanted to abandon this path before it was too late. It was an offer of escape, made gently, without judgment. I won't, she said, just as she had that first day in the canyon, but the words meant something different now. They were a promise, a commitment, a choice made with full knowledge of the consequences. I won't stop. I won't go back. I won't be anyone other than who I'm choosing to become. Nate squeezed her hand, and they stood there as darkness fell over the valley. Two people from different worlds creating a third way together, defying every expectation and boundary that had been placed on them. Tomorrow Sarah Mitchell would die, but tonight someone new was being born in the spaces between worlds. And she was exactly where she wanted to be. The grave they created was perfect in its deception, positioned along a route the cavalry would naturally patrol, freshly disturbed earth suggesting a hasty burial, and Sarah's trunk placed with careful calculation to be discovered but not immediately obvious. Nate supervised every detail, ensuring nothing looked staged while making certain. The soldiers would find exactly what they needed to find. Sarah watched from a distance as they buried her wedding dress, her books, the miniature portrait of her father, and the broken locket that had belonged to her mother. Each item placed in the ground felt like shedding skin, painful and necessary and strangely liberating. When they finished, she walked to the grave and stood there alone, saying goodbye to a version of herself that had tried so hard to be good, to be acceptable, to fit into spaces designed for smaller souls. "Rest well," she whispered to the earth. "You did your best with what you knew, but it's time for something different now." 3 days later, scouts reported that a cavalry patrol had discovered the grave. They'd excavated it carefully, examined the contents, and spent several hours documenting everything before reburying the trunk and marking the grave with a crude wooden cross. One of the soldiers had even stood there for a long time with his hat pressed to his chest, and Sarah wondered if it had been James, mourning the loss of a future he'd planned. Without ever really knowing her, the search parties withdrew from the territory within a week. Word filtered through the settlements that Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Boston, bride of Captain James Thornton, had perished in an Apache attack, a tragic casualty of the violent frontier. Her father would receive official notification. James would file reports and eventually, Sarah supposed, find another suitable bride. The world would move on without her, and that was exactly what she needed, but becoming someone new proved harder than simply declaring it. Sarah struggled with the Apache language, not just the words but the entirely different way of conceptualizing the world. She burned food and made mistakes with traditional crafts and sometimes woke up in the night disoriented, forgetting where she was and why. Desba remained patient but firm, pushing Sarah to try again each time she failed, refusing to let her retreat into doubt. "You chose this," Desba reminded her one afternoon when Sarah was close to tears over her inability to properly prepare a hide. "Choice means nothing if you give up when it gets difficult. The woman you're becoming is built one failure at a time. Embrace them." Nate was different with her now that the decision had been made final. There was a tenderness in the way he taught her things, a patience that suggested he was no longer worried she'd disappear. They spent long evenings together, and he told her stories of Apache history, of the heroes and tricksters and wise women who shaped the culture. Sarah listened and learned and slowly began to understand that she wasn't just learning a language or survival skills, she was learning an entirely different way of being human. "In your culture," Nate explained one night as they sat by the fire, "you see time as a straight line. Past, present, future all separate, all moving in one direction. But we see time as a circle. Everything that was will be again. The ancestors are not gone. They're still here, part of the land, part of us. When you become Apache, you don't just join the people who are alive now. You join everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. That's why you can't just take someone in casually," Sarah said, understanding clicking into place. "Because you're not just accepting them for now. You're saying they're part of the eternal circle." "Exactly." Nate smiled, pleased with her comprehension. "Which is why the council debated so long. Once you're part of the circle, you're part of it forever. There's no trial period, no provisional membership. You're family, completely and permanently. That's both beautiful and terrifying. Most important things are—" He paused, then added quietly, "I need to tell you something. About why I kept pushing you, kept asking how far you go." Sarah turned to face him fully, sensing this was important. "All right. My mother was Mexican. She was captured during a raid when she was young, and she chose to stay with the Apache. She became one of us, married my father, raised children in both worlds. But she never fully let go of who she'd been before. There was always a part of her that held back, that thought maybe someday she'd return to her first people." Nate stared into the fire. "When she got sick, when she knew she was dying, she told me her greatest regret was living between worlds instead of fully committing to one. She said it had made her lonely in a way nothing could fix." "You were afraid I'd do the same thing?" Sarah said softly. "That I'd say I wanted to stay, but keep one foot in my old life, always wondering, always holding back?" "Yes, and I couldn't watch someone He stopped, then started again. I couldn't watch you suffer like she did. Better to know early if you could fully commit or if you'd always be divided. And now? Now I see that you're not divided. You're whole, maybe for the first time. You're not trying to be Apache while secretly remaining American. You're becoming something new, someone who understands both but is limited by neither. He met her eyes. You're becoming exactly what your name says. Someone who walks between. Sarah felt her breath catch. They'd been circling around this for weeks now, the feelings growing stronger each day, but neither quite willing to name them. Nate, I love you, he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I think I've loved you since you stood in that canyon and told me you wouldn't tell me to stop asking hard questions. But I needed to know you could choose this life not because of me, but because it's genuinely what you want. Because love built on dependency isn't really love. It's just another cage. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling. I love you too. And you're right, I didn't choose this life because of you. I chose it because it's the first time I've ever felt like I could breathe fully. Because the work is hard but honest. Because the community values what I can contribute, not just what I look like or who I might marry. Because I'm tired of being acceptable and I want to be authentic instead. She paused. But I won't lie and say loving you isn't part of it. It is. Not the reason, but definitely part of the joy. Nate reached out and wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. In Apache tradition, marriage is simple. Two people decide they want to be together, they tell the community, and then they are. No ceremony unless they want one, no permission needed from anyone except themselves. If you're ready, we could simply declare it. Or we could wait. There's no rush. Sarah thought about the elaborate wedding she'd been planning in Boston. The months of preparation and the hundreds of guests and the suffocating expectations of what marriage should look like. Then she thought about the simplicity of what Nate was offering, two people choosing each other. Building a life based on mutual respect and shared values, free from anyone else's definitions or requirements. I don't want to wait, she said. I've spent enough of my life waiting for the right time or the right circumstances or someone else's permission. Let's just be together. Starting now? Starting now, Nate agreed, and kissed her with a gentleness that made Sarah's heart ache in the best way. They told Desba first. The next morning, and the woman laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that Sarah had never heard from her before. About time, Desba said. You've been making eyes at each other for weeks? Everyone knew this was coming. Everyone? Sarah felt her cheeks heat. Everyone, Desba confirmed. The only people who seemed surprised were you two. Love makes people blind to the obvious. She pulled Sarah into an unexpected embrace. Welcome to the family, sister. Now you're truly stuck with us. The community gathered that evening for what turned into an impromptu celebration. There was food and storytelling and music, and Sarah found herself passed from person to person, each offering congratulations and small gifts. Goyathle presented her with a beautifully crafted knife, its handle carved with symbols Sarah was learning to recognize. A woman should be able to protect herself and those she loves, the elder said. And a member of this family needs tools for the work ahead. Sarah accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. Thank you. For everything. For taking a chance on someone who didn't even know what she was looking for. You knew, Goyathle corrected gently. You just needed the space to admit it. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is acknowledge what we've always known in our hearts, but we're too afraid to claim out loud. As the celebration continued, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching her new family laugh and dance and live with a fullness that took her breath away. These were people who'd lost everything multiple times over land, loved ones, freedom, culture, and yet they persisted in finding joy, in building community. In refusing to let oppression define them, Nate came to stand beside her, slipping his hand into hers. Having second thoughts? Not even close? Sarah leaned against him, fitting naturally into the space at his side. I'm just thinking about how strange life is. A few months ago, I was in Boston, terrified of disappointing people, planning a marriage that felt like a business arrangement. And now I'm here, married to an Apache war leader, part of a community I didn't know existed, more myself than I've ever been. If you told me this would happen, I'd never have believed you. Do you miss it? Any of it? Sarah considered the question honestly. I miss my mother, who died when I was 12. I miss the idea of my father, though not the reality of him. I miss the certainty of knowing what each day would bring, even if those days felt empty. But do I want to go back? She shook her head firmly. Never, not for anything. This life is hard and uncertain and sometimes frightening, but it's mine. I chose it, I'm building it, and it belongs to me in a way nothing in Boston ever did. Good, Nate said, pulling her closer, because I'm not giving you back. They stood there together as the celebration continued around them. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and logic, building something new in the spaces where two worlds met. Sarah thought about the grave marked with a crude wooden cross, about the version of herself sleeping there, and sent her a silent blessing. That woman had done her duty, had tried so hard to be good, and now she could rest. Someone new lived in her place, someone stronger, freer, more alive to possibility. Tell me when to stop, Nate murmured. Echoing the question he'd asked so many times, Sarah smiled up at him, her husband, her partner, her choice. I won't, she said. Not ever? We're just getting started. And as the fire burned bright and the stars wheeled overhead and the hidden valley held them all safe in its embrace, Sarah, who was now called Anaida-ah-ha, the one who walks between, looked toward the future with neither fear nor regret, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd finally found her way home. The dawn rose over the valley in shades of pink and gold, and Sarah woke in nature's arms feeling more at peace than she'd ever imagined possible. There would be challenges ahead, there always were. The outside world wouldn't simply forget about this place forever. Conflicts would arise, both within and beyond the community. Life in the Hidden Valley wasn't paradise. It was just life, with all its complications and contradictions, but it was her life. Chosen freely, lived authentically, shared with people who valued her for who she actually was rather than who they needed her to be. And that made all the difference. Desba found them later that morning, sharing breakfast and talking quietly, and sat down with a satisfied smile. You know what I like about you, Sarah who is no longer Sarah? What's that? You didn't just run away from something. You ran toward something. Too many people spend their lives fleeing from expectations, from pain, from responsibility. But you looked at two different worlds and said, neither of these fits quite right. And then you had the courage to create a third way. That takes vision, takes strength, takes wisdom. Desba took a bite of bread, chewing thoughtfully. My husband would have liked you. He always said the bravest warriors weren't the ones who fought without fear, but the ones who admitted they were terrified and fought anyway. I'm still terrified sometimes, Sarah admitted. Of failing. Of letting people down. Of this all somehow being a dream I'll wake from. Good, fear keeps you sharp. It's the absence of fear that makes people careless. Desba stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Come, there's work to do. Gardens don't plant themselves, and winter will be here before we know it. Being married doesn't excuse you from responsibilities. Sarah laughed and followed. And as she worked side by side with her sister in all but blood, she felt the last pieces of her old self finally settle into the earth, making room for the woman she was becoming to grow tall and strong in the sunlight. The seasons turned. Sarah learned and grew and became part of the rhythm of the valley. She bore children who grew up speaking both Apache and English, who understood the value of living between worlds without being trapped by either. She taught them the stories from both sides of their heritage, gave them tools to navigate complexity, and watched them become something new, a generation that proved boundaries were only as real as people chose to make them. Years later, when historians tried to piece together the story of Sarah Mitchell, The woman who disappeared into Apache country and was never seen again. They would argue about what really happened to her. Some claimed she died in the attack, just as the grave suggested. Others insisted she'd been taken captive and eventually integrated into Apache society. A few romantic souls whispered about a woman who'd chosen freedom over safety and found love in the most unlikely places, but Sarah herself, known now as Naida, didn't much care what historians said. She'd lived the truth of it, felt it in her bones and her blood and her daily choices. She'd walked away from a life that didn't fit and toward one that felt like home. And that journey, terrifying and beautiful and absolutely worth every sacrifice, was hers alone. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd catch Nate watching her with that same intense look he'd worn in the canyon years ago. And she knew he was checking to see if she regretted it, if she wished for anything different. And every time she'd smile and shake her head and say the words that had become their private promise to each other. "Tell me when to stop," he'd say. "I won't," she'd answer. "Not ever." Because some choices, once made fully and freely and with complete honesty, didn't need to be questioned or revisited or doubted. They simply became the foundation on which everything else was built solid. Real and absolutely right, and that was the best kind of happy ending Sarah could have imagined.